Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. Episode 41, Jackey Jackey the Bushranger. Jackey Jackey's real name was William Westwood, and he was born on the 7th of August 1820, the eldest child of James Westwood and Anne Hassler in Manewden, Essex, England. He was baptised on the 27th of August 1820 at the Church of St Mary the Virgin in Essex, England. His father was a publican who owned the gate. His father died in 1841 from an accident, and Anne continued to run the business after her husband died and actually outlived her son, dying in 1862. William was the eldest of 5 siblings, and all of his siblings grew up and lived in England. William had learnt to read and write, and he was employed as an errand boy. On the 10th of March 1835, William and Benjamin Jackson, both aged 14, appeared at the Essex Lent Assizes in Chelmsford, charged with highway robbery. They were accused of stealing a bundle of clothes from Anne Saunders on the road near Manewden. William was found guilty and sentenced to 12 months' imprisonment with hard labour at Chelmsford Jail. Benjamin Jackson was sentenced to be whipped, and then he was discharged. After William's release from jail in 1836, he soon fell into bad company. On the 3rd of January 1837, William, aged 15, together with James Bird, aged 21, appeared at the Essex Quarter Sessions in Chelmsford. The two were charged with stealing a coat belonging to John Rickett that John had left in the stables in Manewden overnight. Westwood and Bird took the stolen coat to a clothes shop owned by Mr. John Warner in Hare Street, Hertfordshire, where they sold it for 6 shillings. In need of a replacement coat, Rickett called in at John Warner's shop the following day, where his stolen coat was offered to him. Westwood and Bird were quickly identified as the culprits and were arrested by Constable Charles Moss. At their trial, Bird was acquitted, but William was found guilty. Due to it being his second offence, he was sentenced to transportation for 14 years. On the 2nd of February 1837, William was delivered to the prison hulk Leviathan in Portsmouth Harbour, where he was held before being transferred to the convict ship Mangles, which sailed for New South Wales on the 18th of March 1837. He arrived in Sydney on the 9th of July 1837. Westwood was a surprisingly refined young man. He had a decent education for the time and a strong grasp of language. He conversed freely with anyone he came across. He was described as standing at 5'5", ruddy complexion, brown hair and grey eyes, a scar on the right side of his upper lip, another scar on the back of his right hand, a blister mark between the breasts, and several tattoos. On his left arm he had an illegible blue mark, which he got on the 7th of August 1820, and then another tattoo on the 3rd of January 1837, which was on the back of his left hand, and it was the figure of the sun. The tattoos were likely either made while serving time in jail or while waiting to be transported. When he arrived in New South Wales, he was sent to the Hyde Park Barracks, and he was kept there until given his assignment. Westwood was assigned to Philip Parker King on his property Dunheved in Rooty Hill near Penrith in Western Sydney. In late December 1837, he was sent to the family property Gidley near Bungendore in New South Wales. Westwood, now 17, endured a harsh journey from Rooty Hill to the place where he was to work off his sentence. Days were hard and nights were spent sleeping on bare ground, chained to the axle of the supply wagon. Eventually he arrived at the station to start work, and it was here that he would spend the next 3 years under the overbearing and tyrannical overseer. He was always testing the boundaries, and after being spotted in town one night, having snuck out of his quarters, he was dragged back to Gidley and given 50 lashes. This only strengthened his resolve to rebel. Westwood then stole some wheat. He was caught, and on the 19th of April 1838 he was sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment. After his incarceration, he was sent back to the station. He was again beaten and whipped, even at the slightest offence, as well as being shortchanged on his already inadequate supplies and rations. He escaped again, but was quickly recaptured and publicly received 50 lashes on the 4th of February 1839. In 1840, Westwood absconded again. When he was inevitably caught, he was given another 50 lashes and sent to work on an iron gang near Goulburn. Conditions here were even worse than his first assignment, but he knew it would be fleeting, and he expected to be sent to a new assignment when he was done. After the stint in the iron gang, however, he was sent back to Gidley, much to his dismay. The routine played out again. Westwood absconded, he was caught, and again given 50 lashes. This time Westwood wanted to make sure he stayed at large. He and 2 other convicts gathered enough supplies to last them until they got clear away, and then on the 7th of September 1840 they bolted. He was at large for 7 months in the bush. He roamed the southern region of New South Wales and was known at that time as Jackey Jackey. This was as a result of blackening his face during robberies to avoid being identified. The name Jackey was used as a complimentary reference to an Aboriginal, much in the same way that the nickname Paddy for an Irishman or Taffy for a Welshman. It had its origins with the faithful and excellent Aboriginal companion of explorer Edward Kennedy, whose name was also Jackey Jackey. Westwood eluded capture by hiding out in mountains and riding long distances in short periods of time. He stole horses, money, clothes, provisions and firearms. On one occasion he held up the mail and took £200 and spent a month at a hotel in Sydney. A sign was posted across Australia calling for him to be caught dead or alive, but even the promise of reward did not seem to tempt anyone. Because he never injured his victims and even turned up to a robbery dressed in a suit, Westwood then became known as the Gentleman Bushranger. It wasn't long before Westwood fell in with the notorious bushranger Paddy Curran. The pair were associated from their time as convicts. Unbeknownst to Westwood, Curran was extremely violent and his morals were diametrically opposed to Westwood's in just about every way. Jackey Jackey was well liked by the odd station hands who found him polite, kind and well behaved towards them. Curran, on the other hand, behaved brutally, particularly towards women. When Curran assaulted and raped the wife of a farmer whose place they had robbed, Jackey Jackey threatened to shoot him for this. He then took his horse, his rifle and ammunition and abandoned him and declared that if they ever met again, he would kill Curran. Curran was sentenced to death and he was hung in Berrima Jail in September 1841. Jackey Jackey had a taste for racehorses, stealing from Terence Murray and several others in the region, either on the roads or from farms. He attributed his success in evading capture to his choice of fine horseflesh over the run-down nags the police rode. Among his crimes, he robbed the Queanbeyan Mail and robbed Mr. Edinburgh, among several others on the Sydney Road. In fact, he took a particular liking to robbing mailmen, as the takings were often rather good. By his own account, there were several close shaves with the police, including one where a supposed friend had taken money from him to purchase a Christmas dinner, but had instead procured the constabulary. On the afternoon of the 11th of January 1841, Jackey Jackey stole a black mare from Mr. MacArthur before attempting to rob a mailman that night at Bungoni, whereupon shots were fired. The next day he raided a store at Borrow Creek where he procured fine garments and dressed himself so that he may cut a fine figure while going about his nefarious deeds, including a rather fetching top hat. Such was the extent of his outrages that the entirety of the mounted police in the region, trackers included, were led by Lieutenant Christie and Mr. Stewart in hot pursuit. On the 13th of January 1841, things came to a head when a man arrived in Bungendore shouting that he was being chased by a bushranger who meant to shoot him. Sure enough, Jackey Jackey soon arrived on a stolen horse, riding through Bungendore for a full hour and a half, stopping only to have a chat with a man named Eccleston. Soon word reached the local magistrate Powell, who went with his brother Frank and a local man named Richard Rutledge to capture the infamous bushranger, despite a distinct lack of weapons with which to defend themselves against him. After the posse hesitated in approaching the rogue, he caught wind of them and mounted his steed, riding off at full gallop. The men gave chase. A man named William Balcombe was riding ahead with Reverend McGrath in a gig. Stopping the gig on the road, McGrath and Balcombe got out and Balcombe confronted the bushranger, McGrath also pulling a revolver on him. Westwood surrendered, complaining that he could have gotten away if his musket was not in such poor shape. He was escorted back to the local inn, where he was detained. However, Jackey Jackey was not ready to go down without a fight, and during the night he overpowered one of the guards and stole his weapons. He bolted out of the inn and across the plains. Frank Powell fired a pistol at Westwood without effect and gathered more firearms from inside before heading off in hot pursuit with a postman who had become embroiled in the affair by accident. Soon Jackey Jackey was once more apprehended. But the next day, while being escorted to Bargo Brush, Westwood escaped custody on foot. He made it a mile away before being recaptured. Not in the mood for any nonsense, the police tied Westwood to his horse for the remainder of the trip. That night, Westwood broke out of the lockup and stole the guard's weapon and ammunition before taking a horse and riding to freedom. The beginning of the end came when he called into the Black Horse Inn on the Berrima Road. Westwood casually walked in and ordered refreshments. He then proceeded to bail the place up. He was served by Miss Gray, the publican's daughter, who recognised that this man with pistol braces and fine clothes must be the infamous Jackey Jackey. She screamed and pounced on the bushranger, who fought to throw the girl off, as she called her mother and father. All three tried to restrain Westwood, who shook them off time and again. Gray, the publican, and two assigned servants, Waters and McCrowan, subdued the bushranger, who took 2 fierce blows to the head with the shingling hammer to go down. Mr. Gray received a £30 reward, which had been offered by the government for Jackey Jackey's capture, and Waters, who was a convict, received a free pardon. On the 8th of April 1841, he appeared at the Berrima Circuit Court, charged with stealing from a dwelling house and putting people in bodily fear, robbing with firearms and horse stealing. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Although in chains, he escaped the Stone Quarry, or Picton lockup, on the way to Darlinghurst Jail and hid up a tree. The Australian newspaper commented that the cool intrepidity and daring of this man is astonishing. He is moreover well dressed, assuming all disguises. He succeeded in evading the police and was not heard of again until he called at the toll gate of Parramatta Road, about 3 miles out of Sydney. He asked the tollkeeper if he had ever heard of Jackey Jackey. The tollkeeper said, "Oh yes, but he's a long way off. He ain't game to come to Sydney. They would catch him if he did." Westwood then drew his pistol from his waist and told the scared tollkeeper that he was Jackey Jackey and he'd spent the last 3 days in Sydney. The incident ended by Jackey Jackey giving the old man a bottle of rum. He was recaptured in mid-July 1841 and held in the prison on Cockatoo Island at Port Jackson. He organised a party of 25 other convicts to join him in an escape attempt. Escape from Cockatoo Island was considered impossible. The gang subdued a guard and tied him up. Breaching the boundaries, they made it to the water and were about to risk sharks and drowning to swim to Balmain, but then were deftly captured by the water police. The New South Wales government had enough of the troublesome Englishman and sent him to fulfil his sentence in Van Diemen's Land with his co-conspirators. He was transported to Van Diemen's Land in the Marion Watson and arrived in Port Arthur on the 8th of March 1842. On the trip, the convicts were put on the brig of the prison ship, naked and shackled, in an attempt to prevent any escapes. The men broke free from their cages and tried to reach the deck. Soldiers battened down the hatches until they arrived at Port Arthur. When the hatches were opened, the prisoners were unconscious in the brig, having been denied food and adequate oxygen due to the captain's decision not to risk opening the hatches to take food to the men during the several days' trip. Not long after arriving at Port Arthur, he escaped, but after 9 days' starvation in that inhospitable place, he was captured, and one of the convicts who escaped with him, Frank Bailey, had been shot. He attempted escape again and received 100 lashes. Despite Port Arthur's reputation as an inescapable prison, William Westwood managed to escape from Port Arthur multiple times. Most occasions resulted in a few days of freedom at most. In one attempt at freedom with 2 other convicts, the trio waded naked in the waters of Eagle Hawk Neck. Westwood's companions were taken by sharks, and in his panic, Westwood managed to lose his clothes after his bundled gear was swept away in the waters as he crossed. He was found days later, wandering naked and starving. Such repeated misbehaving put him in solitary confinement for almost 3 months. In 1845 he emerged and was assigned to the commissariat William Champ, the then commandant of Port Arthur. He promoted Westwood to his boat crew, and at this time he helped rescue a boatload of soldiers after their vessel had capsized. His reward was that Lieutenant Governor Sir John Eardley Wilmot removed Westwood from Port Arthur to serve 6 months at Glenorchy Probation Station. Temptation got the better of him and he once more escaped on the 31st of July 1845. This time he successfully took to bushranging with 2 others, stealing guns and ammunition. They travelled up through the Tasmanian Midlands in an attempt to reach Launceston, where they planned to steal a boat and sail to Sydney. They became hopelessly lost and were unable to find a boat, resulting in one of the men leaving the company after getting lost, while the other remained until they reached Green Ponds, whereupon he left for fear that Westwood would shoot him, as he was a designated guide through the bush and had only succeeded in getting them stranded in unfamiliar territory. When Westwood found himself alone again, he continued on foot towards Launceston, hoping to find a way off the island, but was recaptured before reaching his destination, and by this time he posed no resistance. And there was an article, Pardon Conditional on Not Returning to Europe, Police Department, 4th of August 1845. Whereas information is now before me that William Westwood, per Marion Watson, George Allen, per Arab 2, and Thomas Gillen, per Louisa, convicts illegally at large, have committed various felonies. This is to give notice that I am authorised by His Excellency, the Lieutenant Governor, to offer the reward of a recommendation to Her Majesty's mercy for a pardon, valid everywhere, except in Europe, to any convict who shall by any information or otherwise be means of capturing the said convicts. And the description of William Westwood was labourer, 5 foot 8.5, age 25, pale complexion, large round head, light brown sandy whiskers and hair, forehead broad, light brown eyebrows, light hazel eyes, large nose, medium mouth, thick chin. Remarks: 3rd of January 1837, 7th of August 1820. On left arm, sun on back, same hand, scar right side upper lip, scar back left wrist. Native of Bishop Stortford, Essex. Jackey Jackey was caught and tried in the Hobart Supreme Court for robbery whilst being armed whilst illegally at large on the 4th of September 1845 and was initially sentenced to death. As he had not harmed anyone, the death sentence was commuted to transportation for life to Norfolk Island. Westwood found himself once more sailing to exile, this time heading to what was referred to as the Isle of Despair. In February 1844, there was a change of administration at Norfolk Island. Alexander Maconochie, the previous man in charge, had firmly believed in the benefits of rehabilitating offenders rather than simply punishing them, and to this end he reduced work hours, including a work-free Sunday. He created a mark system that meant that good behaviour would be rewarded. The flogging incidents were decreased. Perhaps the most significant measure Maconochie had brought in was vegetable patches. Inmates were given small gardens within and were also given cooking pots and utensils to cook their own meals, allowing them to eat in their cells in privacy. The reforms were considerably effective, with morale high and major incidents in the prison reduced. Despite Governor Kipps's recommendations to the government to continue Maconochie's residence at Norfolk Island, the decision had already been made and Major Joseph Childs became the new commandant. As a military man with wide campaign experience and a strict disciplinarian, he decided to institute a few changes to bring the convicts under his thumb. To this end, incidents of floggings were increased, hours of labour were also increased, rations were reduced, and the small gardens the prisoners were allowed and the produce they had been growing therein were banned. In a half-hearted attempt to respond to complaints, the administration allowed convicts a cup of peas and a cup of flour every day. Unsurprisingly, this was not met with gratitude that was expected by the administration, and Childs set in place a proclamation whereby food was to be served in bulk and individual cooking prohibited. When the inmates were at work, their utensils were confiscated on the 1st of July 1846. This was the final straw, and Westwood incited a work party to take arms against the guards and administration of the island. Gathering inmates in rough military formation, they marched into the barrack yard, stormed the store, and seized every utensil within reach. Westwood hushed them. Now many said, "I've made up my mind to bear this oppression no longer. But remember, I'm going low the gallows. If any man funks, let him stand out. Those who want to follow me, come on." Armed with a cudgel, Westwood, his face transformed with rage, claimed first blood when he clubbed a particularly despised guard to death. He felled him, and the inmates, with their pent-up fury, now finding a savage outlet, struck him with knives, sticks and pitchforks and any other weapons they could find. He then took up an axe and headed to the barracks, followed by a seething horde of convicts. He entered the kitchen and murdered the cook, and upon spying 2 sleeping soldiers in an adjoining room, used the axe to stave the skull of one soldier. The soldier, seeing Westwood before him with the bloodied axe, begged, "Please think of my wife and children," to which the unrepentant bushranger replied, "Wife and children be damned." Westwood then killed the soldier as brutally as the others. When the others had finished with him, he was a mutilated corpse. Needing a moment of respite from the mayhem he'd caused, Westwood filled a pipe with tobacco and had a smoke while the convicts rampaged around him. The convicts moved on in a wildly rushing mass of about 1,600 men to the barrack yard gate, where they pushed aside a sentry and an overseer who tried to hold them. Their one thought now was to get to Government House, where the main target of their wrath was Mr. Barrow, the stipendiary magistrate. As they passed by the lime kiln, Jackey Jackey, now wielding an axe, ran over to a hut, forced open the door and killed 2 policemen, one who was asleep in his bed. As they moved down the road towards Government House, they were confronted by a line of soldiers, muskets at the ready. As though the force of their passion had suddenly been spent, the convicts halted and then began to retreat towards the lumber yard, where their weapons were taken from them and they returned to their cells. Westwood and 13 other key figures in the riot, including Bushranger Lawrence Kavanagh, formerly of Cash and Company, were tried in September and charged with the murders. The evidence was irresistible and 12 of the men were sentenced to execution by hanging. Westwood attempted another escape, and he was ring-bolted to the wall of the cell by his hands, with his feet fixed to the floor by chains. The door of his cell was left open so the guards could watch him. While in the cell, he was befriended by Thomas Rogers, a religious instructor, who encouraged him to dictate an account of his life, which Westwood did. It covers about 25 pages. It is very detailed and recalls the events of his life from Manewden in Essex to New South Wales, Van Diemen's Land and Norfolk Island. Here is an excerpt that gives an insight into his early life. It starts, "I was born and bred in Manewden in Essex. I was brought up by a kind father and mother. They tried to give me a good education, but I paid no attention to it. I entered upon evil courses when very young. At 14 years of age, I was taken up for highway robbery and committed to Chelmsford Jail in 1835. On the day of the trial, through the intercession of my father and on account of my youth, I got off with 12 months' imprisonment. When my time had expired on the morning I was released from jail, the first person I saw was my father, awaiting to accompany me home, where on arriving I was surrounded by kindness from my parents, and my father advised me never to again keep company with my old companions. I took his advice for some time, but not for long. I became acquainted with a young man, a greater vagabond than myself, who induced me to live like himself by plundering day and night. But this game did not last long. It brought me among my old companions and to Chelmsford Jail. On the 3rd of January 1837, I was tried for robbery and, being an old offender, received 14 years' sentence of transportation while my companion was discharged. While I remained in jail, waiting to go to Portsmouth, one day I shall never forget, my father, mother, sisters and brothers came to take their last farewell of me. The tears rolled down their cheeks for their undutiful son and bad brother. I took my leave of them at that time, thinking I should never see them any more. Shortly afterwards, I was removed down to Portsmouth and had been there only a few days when the order came down from London for 300 prisoners to go on the ship Mangles, and I was one of that number. We sailed from Portsmouth on the 15th of March 1837 and had a pleasant voyage to Sydney. I had not been with him long when I was prosecuted several times for little or nothing. I found it impossible to remain with him and I took to the bush, thinking to make my situation in life better. I was well aware I could not make it any worse. The day before Jackey Jackey's execution, he wrote a letter to his parents. Norfolk Island, South Pacific Ocean, 12th of October 1846. My dear father and mother, heaven knows I have neglected you, to whom I owe so much kindness, and have in my youth acted contrary to your wishes and parental instructions. Thus it follows that it is now my lot to address you, whom I love dearly, under such distressing, and to you as well as myself, such painful circumstances. You have, I am sure, had many unhappy moments respecting me, but I now must endeavour to prepare you for a shock, which I am afraid will be almost more than you can or all will be able to endure. But my dear parents, brothers and sisters, mourn not for me. I who long before you can possibly receive his will, have been ushered into the awful presence of his Maker, and will have appeared before that great tribunal of justice, where all must render an account for their actions, where all hearts are open, and where all secrets are known. Therefore I say, my dear relations, mourn not for me, but let my unfortunate lot be a lesson to the living. Let the younger branches of our family, and the offspring of them, learn to honour their fathers and mothers in their youth. For neglecting those precepts has brought me to the situation I'm now placed in. But it is, and it must be, the work of that great God who made heaven and earth, and all that therein, and who knows all things. For it is now, and only now, that I see my error. It is now only I can see and know the multitude of God's mercies towards me. It is now I am brought to the right sense of my duty towards him. I can now, my dear beloved parents, withhold the truth of my fate no longer from you. For an outbreak took place at this ill-fated settlement on the 1st day of July, when some lives were lost, for which I have been tried and condemned to die, which sentence will be carried into effect before the setting of tomorrow's sun. Bear this with humble fortitude, for I first made up my mind not to write at all, but then I thought you might perchance see the account in the public press, and I know it would be a great satisfaction to you, even under such trying and truly heartrending circumstances, to hear, and that from myself, that I died as a Christian, embracing the same faith as I was taught when a child, putting my whole trust and confidence in Christ Jesus. During this time of trial and affliction, I have been attended to by Reverend Thomas Rogers of the Church of England, to which gentleman I owe everything. His attention to me has been unceasing night and day. He has laboured to bring me a right sense of duty towards an offended Maker. May that God, whom he has taught me to fear and love, reward him 10,000-fold. Dearly beloved parents, give my kind love and affection to my dear brothers and sisters. Tell them I trust and earnestly hope my disgraceful and unfortunate, untimely end will be an everlasting barrier against their ever doing evil. Tell them with you to bear up against this unhappy occurrence, and endeavour to spend their lives in such a way as will ensure a peaceful death. I again entreat you all not to mourn for me. I hope to meet you all in the realms of everlasting bliss. May God bless you, may he be with you, may he guide your steps, direct your hearts, and in the end may he receive your never-dying souls into his mansion of everlasting happiness and peace, is the earnest and sincere prayers of your unfortunate and dying son, William Westwood. And a footnote says, Dear parents, I send you a piece of my hair in remembrance of me, your son, William Westwood. Goodbye, and God bless you all. On the morning of his execution, on the 13th of October 1846, Westwood wrote a letter to the Reverend of Port Arthur. As in duty bound to you for the kindness you have shown me and the interest I have always seen you take in those been under your spiritual care, whatever may be their fate, I have been induced to write to you, hoping this may find you in good health and in the enjoyment of all of God's choicest blessings. I have to inform you that long before this letter reaches your hands, the hand that wrote this will be cold in death. I do not grieve that the hour is fast approaching that is the end of my earthly career. I welcome death as a friend. The world, or what I have seen of it, has no allurements in it for me. 'Tis not for me to boast, but yet, sir, allow a dying man to speak a few words to one who has always shown a great sympathy for the wretched outcasts of society, and ever with a Christian charity strove to recall the wretched wanderer to a sense of his lost condition. I started in life with a good feeling for my fellow man. Before I well knew the responsibility of my station in life, I had forfeited my birthright. I became a slave and was sent far from my native country, my parents, my brother and sisters, torn from all that was dear to me, and for that a trifling offence. Since then I have been treated more like a beast than a man, until nature could bear no more. I was like many others driven to despair by the oppressive and tyrannical conduct of those whose duty it was to prevent us from being treated in this way. Yet these men are courted by society and the British government, deceived by the interested representations of those men, and continue to carry on a system that has and still continues to ruin the prospects of the souls and bodies of thousands of British subjects. In all my career, I never was cruel. I always felt keenly for the miseries of fellow creatures, and was ever ready to do all in my power to assist them in the utmost. Yet my name will be handed down to posterity, branded with the most opprobrious epithet that man could bestow. But 'tis little matter now. I have thus given vent to my feelings, knowing that you will bear with me, and I know that you have and will exert yourself for the welfare of wretched men. It is on this account that I have strove, through in but a feeble manner, to express my feelings. The crime from which I suffer is murder. Reverend Sir, you will shudder at my cruelty, but I only took life, those that I depraved of life, though they did not in a moment send a man to his last account, inflicted on many a lingering death for many years. They tortured men's minds as well as their bodies, and after years of mental and bodily torture sent them to a premature grave. This is what I called refined cruelty, and is carried on, and I blush to own it, by Englishmen, and under the enlightened British government. I was tried and sent to Norfolk Island, and this place is now worse than I can describe. Every species of petty tyranny that long experience has taught some of these tyrants is put in force by the authorities. The men are half-starved, hard-worked and cruelly flogged. These things brought on the affair of the 1st of July, of which you have no doubt heard. So the strong ties of earth will soon be wrenched, and the burning fever of this life will soon be quenched, and my grave will be a haven, a resting place for me, William Westwood. So out of the bitter cup of misery I have drank from my 10 long years, and the sweetest draught is that which takes away the misery of my living death. It is the friend that deceives no man. All will then be quiet, no tyrant will then disturb my repose, I hope. So I now bid the world adieu and all it contains. William Westwood in his writing. He also wrote a declaration, the dying declaration of William Westwood, alias Jackey Jackey. I, William Westwood, wish to die in the communion of the Christ's Holy Church, seeking a mercy of God through Jesus Christ our Lord and Saviour. Amen. I wish to say, as a dying man, that I believe 4 men now going to suffer are innocent of the crime laid to their charge. Lawrence Kavanagh, himself a convicted bushranger, Henry Whiting, William Pickthorne and William Scrimshaw. I declare that I never spoke to Kavanagh on the morning of the riots, and these 3 other men had no part in the killing of John Morris, as far as I know of. I have never spoken a disrespectful word of any man since my confinement. I die in charity with all men, and now I ask your prayers for my soul. William Westwood, aged 26 years. Even though he was in communion with the Church of England, William Westwood was buried in an unhallowed grave with the other hanged men, and the mass grave was called the Murderer's Mound on the boundaries of the prison. Such was the impact of the riots that the commandant was fired from his post, and calls were made for the Norfolk Island penal colony to be shut down and inmates transferred to Port Arthur. So in a sense, Westwood had succeeded in bringing about a change in how convicts were treated, although he would not live to see the closure of one of the most brutal, dehumanising prisons in the British Empire.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.